that is a reference you guys apparently don't get because he was neither deaf nor mute for that thing. But anyway, Ghost of the Shell. So
Yeah, definitely. I got the reference.
I barely watch old anime.
I was like, you guys took that way too literally to clue me in that you understood the reference. So.
It's at least a fair shot that I've seen a popular anime.
Like
from 1980.
Well, no, I'm just thinking like outside of the Ghibli movies, there are two that I'll claim to have seen, and that's not entirely fair because there are a couple of like in that vein, but I don't think they were actually Ghibli movies. So I've offended like at least 5 people that like anime and watch this.
Is one of them Akira? Because that's the one everyone's always seen, except me.
No, I probably would have because like so I never watched any with my dad, but like dad liked like what's the like BattleTech and stuff like that, right? And I think he was into Akira as well. So well, yeah, but they were
kaiju,
also different
Jaegers,
things, right?
and Evangelion.
So, no, like we're talking 80s, right? Like this was before I was born type stuff. So
I don't know how far back Evangelion goes, I'll admit, but it might have been from the 80s.
But I'm
Gundam.
Pretty sure it wasn't that one. Because like we had some of the like aliens as toys, and then like he wouldn't let us play with the Gundams, obviously. So let's see.
Can't be trusted.
Toys are too special.
Well, I mean, we were children. I wouldn't trust my kids with my toys. So anyway, whatever.
No, this is good. This could be our topic for the day.
Yeah, for sure.
Organizations of anime
structures. But yeah.
No, so anyway, next week we have a topic. We're set. We're doing things.
Yes, we even have homework. I've been doing some of it. Oh boy.
Yeah, so I liked Vampire Hunter D, and I liked Ghost in the Shell, and I guess I've seen Cowboy Bebop, but that I was ambivalent to that in a weird way. Like some people just like gush and just like, oh my god, it's the most amazing thing ever. You'll get some of that from me for Ghost in the Shell, even though it's been like 10 years since I've seen it all the way through. But Cowboy Bebop was like, all right, this is pretty good. So, but anyway, Dresden organizations. So
well, you're the one wearing the shirt. You can start it off.
I am the authority of authorities. Is that what you're saying? EG is right there. Like you can't just pass.
Yeah, but my organization is in the real world. These are the Yankees. Yeah. It has nothing to do with this fantasy land we're diving into.
And I gotta imagine between the whole team, they've got at least 2 eyeballs. So
yeah.
No,
that one we got.
We did get the jokes this time.
Oh, you got the reference. So
yeah. It wasn't funny, but we got it.
Yeah. So I guess we were talking about organizations in general, but last week when we were discussing prepping for this, we were mostly talking about the Venatori, and then one extra conspiracy theory for flavor that we're almost certainly going to have to touch on because, we didn't do our homework. So, but
that doesn't.
So apparently I'm in charge, so I'm going to pretend I'm the director, and I'm going to pretend I've done a bunch of research for this. So there's we find out about the Venatori primarily in backup, and then they show up in a couple of short stories and comic books aside from that. Well, I mean, one of each, I think, mostly. They get mentioned in the main series, in like Proven Guilty, I think. From some of the reading that I was doing, but the Venatori is kind of interesting because they have a split organization due to the nature of what they're doing. They have the Venatori, I guess, just like, the hunters is what it translates to, at least according to the books and everything. And then you have the Venatori Umbrorum, which is the shadow of the hunters, which I think is what Thomas referred to them as, right? Because everybody assumes that it's the hunters of the shadows, but really they've probably got it backwards, and it's the shadow of the hunters. Because the Venatori are the 200 some odd badasses that actually do the wet work, so to speak. And then you've got like 5,000 nerds that are backing them up. According to the wiki, I don't know where those numbers were pulled from, if that was a quote or whatever, but Dresden mostly just runs into the Venatori Umbrorum and the White Council in the same way, right? So they're basically like my understanding is that they're mostly mortals. They're your kind of like secret, secret lab type dudes. Black Mesa. Sorry, I've been playing Half-Life 2 again, or Hawkins Lab, right? Since I'm watching Stranger Things, we just caught up last night, but it's like you've got those kinds of guys, right? That they're off somewhere in their secret lab doing research, because you get to see some of their field operatives in Warcry. They're kind of like the main people that are in trouble, and we got to go send 5 wardens to go save them, right? Because we got the 4 kids in Dresden. So yeah, they're kind of the guys that are doing the like super taboo dark research. They tend to deal a lot with outsiders, because the Venatori themselves, the hunters, are going after actual like cults or possibly outsiders themselves. I mean, you've got White Court vampires on there, on their payroll, at least on some level. So, I imagine they get their hands dirty in a fistful of warlocks. You've got, Wyatt Earp, right?
Yeah.
So, as far as we know, very mortal, but, wasn't he, am I mixing things? Was he also a knight, or?
No.
I don't know. No. Okay. So I know we got into speculation both with like the Knights of the Cross at one point and, the Venatori, and just be like, what other famous characters would have been, right? So, because it's like, how fun would it be just to go down the list of like the founding fathers and be like, Ben Franklin almost certainly was a Venatori, right? Or at least the Venatori Umbrorum, right? I can't imagine he's getting a lot of field work. Abraham Lincoln might have been an actual Venatori according to the movie. So, he did hunt vampires, but sure. Doc Holliday. I mean, yeah.
I feel like he's a little bit of a loose cannon for that, but that would have been entertaining.
Right. Well, and I mean, the way that it's structured according to backup, right, is like, I think you're only allowed to know like one other member, right? Because that's how their spells are broken down. So
and
it's
your
like,
point of whatever, right? And it goes years without contact sometimes between these people.
Right.
Obviously not in Thomas and Laura's case, because they're,
Right, but Laura has to know at least one other person, right, to be getting the receiving orders from them to then pass it on to Thomas, so she knows at least 2. Right?
Well, it depends on how they get it, because the archive is running the whole show behind the scenes. So she just kind of is sending out messages to the handlers, so to speak, and they don't even know that she's the one doing it, because that was part of the word of Jim, was like basically no one knows that the archive is running this whole show by nature of the fact of what they have to do.
Which makes sense. Although the fact that in their history the Venatori had tried to banish the fairies, that's a giant undertaking, and that sounds like it would take all of their tiny little organization to do so.
Not necessarily, though. I mean, so yes and no, right? Because like up to a point where they lost, it was oral tradition, right? Largely, so like you had some instances and that sort of thing, but like when they lost that part of the war, so to speak, was, the Brothers Grimm, right? Thomas called them the G-Men, which it's cute and confuses me, because I'm thinking government, and then it's like, oh no, wait. For them, the Brothers Grimm, way scarier, way
but
worse,
also don't forget Gutenberg.
Right. Yeah. So, and what's fun about that though is because we see a little bit of that on the other side too, I think, where basically like Mab dealt with the Brothers Grimm to make sure that shit got published so that they weren't going anywhere, type of thing. So you're literally getting to see both battle lines in Dresden in the middle, having no fucking idea, which is just classic for his character. Like, vast, powerful wizard, knows way too much and yet not enough all at the same time, and literally in this case, because he would be like the next nuclear bomb in that war if, he knew certain things, right? And the White Council in general, like the next worst thing to, the printing press and the Brothers Grimm is fucking wizards finding out about it, because, not only are they going to add some level of permanence to something that needs to be forgotten to death, which is a super cool concept in and of itself, but also some of these crazy ass wizards are probably going to use that power, right? Whether they think they can control it, or they're the Black Council, or whatever the case may be, like, that would be terrible.
So. It's
and
interesting
you can't
because
tell wizards that they're wrong.
Well, you can. It doesn't mean
they're
they
not gonna
listen.
Yeah.
Well, in the vein of what they had done with the Black Court, it's publishing things to be able to make. Oh, that was the White Court, but same concept.
Right.
Publishing things to be able to make sure that others either are constantly draining the well so it can never be replenished, and therefore can't do giant amount of things, or just so that others can use the information against their enemies. And that's exactly what they knew was going to happen with the Stygian Sisterhood and backup. And that is what cannot happen, but that is what the White Council thinks it should do. And they can't just
it's the most
explain why
efficient,
it's
stupid
wrong
way
to
to
the
go
wizards.
about it.
Like
Well,
as soon
and
as you tell wizards, you don't get to know this thing because it's bad. There's like, I'm going to know this thing and fuck you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly, like wizards are always the trope of like knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? Whether it's good or bad or whatever, like we're gonna go everywhere. And yes, sometimes it's dangerous, and yes, sometimes I'm the problem. But magic is the solution to all of those problems as well, you know. But it is kind of interesting that it's like the White Council takes the stance that it's like, if we publish this and everybody uses it, that's why we've got new age books at the bookstore, right? Is because, you know, you're calling out to all of those demons and outsiders and whatever else, but they can't fulfill all of the orders. So basically nobody gets anything. Seems like a pretty effective way to make sure that even though the outsiders don't get obliterated, they don't get consigned to oblivion, that they still can't do anything, right? You know,
Well,
like, so
it would be interesting. I mean, some things can be forgotten to death. Some things probably can't be. Those ones that are pretty integral to some amount of the universe's existence, and outsiders may not be able to be forgotten to death.
Well, yeah, and I mean it to that regard, right? Like some outsiders can be, and some gods can be, and whatever. But obviously, like outsiders as a concept can't be for some reason, right? Like nobody's sitting around the campfire just, you know, like keeping a Shoggoth going, right? Like, you know, the monster that you see in Warcry, like that shit is consigned to the outside, and nobody cares about that specific guy. So unless they're being carved off of like, you know, elemental fear or some other like, you know, group concept, you know, like obviously, you know, I'm sure HP Lovecraft probably set them back a level as well, right? You know, like it's not his story per se, but you have the whole, you know, the Lovecraftian universe and that sort of thing with, you know, the Hounds of Tindalos. It wasn't one of his stories, but it's always lumped into the same, to the mythos, you know, to the Cthulhu mythos and everything like that. So, but like, yeah, those things aren't going to get consigned to oblivion, right? But, you know, I think they talk about in backup, like, you know, there's some old, you know, old gods from Africa or whatever, that it's like, you know, the tribes that came up with them aren't there anymore, or whatever the case may be. Like those guys are going away, because that's how faith-based power works in the Dresden Files, right? If no one's priming the pump and feeding the tank, so to speak, then it's going to go away. But there's obviously like other creatures that don't have to follow those rules. And it's kind of weird that the Fae have to, because the Fae came from somewhere.
Right, the Fae came from somewhere. I suspect that the Fae don't have to be known to be alive, but I think it does increase their power base. If somebody wandering around in the woods is wondering, what's that creepy sound that's behind me? Maybe it's an evil fairy that's going to eat my face. It gives them some extra power. It might also just give people like Leah more of an angle of like, I'm the fairy that you heard of in your childhood, and I can give you everything you want for a price. It gives them just kind of more like mental relevance, and therefore more power. But I don't think that the Fae can be forgotten to death as they are now, because they are the guardians.
Well, yeah, their reason for doing what they did was to keep their tether. They're not based on, you know, the same way the gods are empowered by faith, and they needed that more active worship. The fairies didn't need that, you know, the mantles and all this, and we've speculated and gotten various words of Jim about. But in general, the reason they needed the tether was the reason that they all needed the tether, is so that they could, you know, be here. And because Oblivion is not, I don't read Oblivion as a place like the outside. It's more of a state of existence where you're just cut off from the world and
state of non-existence.
Well, I mean, you could probably be consigned to the Never Never forever if you're forgotten, for instance, and then your dements in your realm will shrink, and you'll just kind of. But it's it's not like you get sent into the void like you're an outsider.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is kind of tricky because it seems like you would be forgotten. I mean, yeah, you're forgotten to death in the sense that, yeah, like your power diminishes, and once the last person forgets your name, and don't they mention something like the archive waits even 1,000 years past that just to make sure
to delete it from the memory banks, yeah.
Just to get rid of it from the archive. And at that point, like, because take your suggestion on the flip side, right? If their domain just shrinks and they're just consigned to the Never Never, I mean, the theoretically somebody could stumble upon them again, right? Some Margaret Le Fay is running from whomever and trips into some obliviated, sorry, I've been trying not to say it the whole time, I'm just going to go for it, but some obliviated deity somewhere, and it's like, I mean, they're going to be weak. They're going to be nothing in that theory, but that would potentially jumpstart the process. And it doesn't seem like it works that way. Maybe that'd be a fun hook for a story, in a role playing game or something like that. But
I guess it depends on how long it takes, right?
Right.
If you're cut off and you're something that relies on more of an active worship, then you're probably going to fade even quicker than Mab and them are probably going to last for a while if they got cut off tomorrow. Eventually,
sure,
things will, but that's also because of the nature of the mantles. Is it's fixed power, so
right.
they're a little trickier anyway to get rid of in that regard.
Which, I mean, that kind of takes us back to the cosmology thing too, right? Like, so going all the way back, right? So if the mantles belonged to a deity, theoretically, and they got diced up and passed on to the Fae, which is, one of the theories that we see crop up every now and again anyway. Like, that's not how that power should work, though, right? So, like, either they would need to find a new way to fuel it, or eventually shouldn't that power disappear, unless by nature of being a mantle, it plays by different rules. But I don't think it does, and that's why you've got Odin Vadarung Kringle running around doing what he's doing, because he does need to find supplemental power. He does need belief. That's why he's got, like, Kringle is, Kringle's going to be the main thing that's going to be juicing him up and keeping him going, at least, even though he's obviously going to be limited in how he can use that power. I don't think you got nearly as many people believing in Odin per se, but at least his name is out there, so he's not going anywhere. But, like, if he was Odin and he decided to split Odin into 3 to 6 pieces or whatever the case may be and pass that on, what's keeping that going?
Right. I mean, that's why I've always thought the mantles were sort of the answer to that problem of eventually we're going to run out of juice. We need something more stable to, stick around. And that's why the mantles are what they are. Because, you can't, as far as we know, and depending on how it actually goes with the lady's virginity, but putting that aside, you can't really just destroy a mantle. You can change it. You can absorb it. You can shift it from court to court if you have the table, but it's this well of power that's meant to transfer. It's meant to endure. And so it seems more like, because the Fae are so tied to humanity, you can influence it. Like Kringle's is a lesser mantle to a big degree, but you can influence it through human faith and aspects and what these people do. And you can either, I guess, play into that as the fairy, or you can sort of be twigged to go that way. Because I don't think the Kringle of 1,000 years ago is the same guy running around now giving out presents in that same, it changed. He morphed over time because that's what people saw him become. He's not sticking toys in people's shoes anymore.
So
presumably.
The only mantles we've seen actually change hands so far have been the ladies, right? And Harry and Lloyd Slate the Knight. Those are the only ones we've actually seen pass from one person to another, right? Every other mantle, even if we know it is a mantle, we've never seen Kringle go to a new person. We've never seen the Earl King change to a new person. So the nature of its preservation.
Well, I guess technically Ivy, we know how that passed, was her birth.
Well, that's confusing then.
Hers is also a different weird mantle that's a different issue.
Right. But Bob's statement that Molly is just going to be Maeve in a few years, and how scary that is, that we don't know that that's going to happen to Ivy, but we haven't seen that happen to anyone else either. We don't know for certain that that's what would happen if someone else took the Earl King mantle, that he would just be the same exact person over the course of a couple decades.
Well, based on what we've seen with Molly and Mab as we've gotten to know her, it's essentially up to the holder as to how long. Like, you're going to give it 1,000 years, you're going to be more or less indistinguishable. But at the same time, if there's enough of you in there, you can sort of hang on a little bit.
Right. But it's like the preservation quality that you're talking of, what the mantle is doing, of making it a more fixed idea, probably comes with the drawback of you're going to be heavily influenced to be the same person that was.
Yeah, you'd have to.
Right. But that rule of mantles might be specific to the fairy queens in their court.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't think it's quite. I mean, the Archives is obviously a very assertive mantle of its own for its own reasons.
Quite the digression. Yeah, there's definitely a couple of comments that I wanted to address too, so that's a good one to start with. It is kind of interesting that it's like, if there is an archaeological, footprint that, somebody would be able to dig up, but on the flip side, like, the nature of the archive is to know literally everything that's written down, to the point that Dresden can write a note on a napkin and she's going to get the message, right? And so, like, I mean, I wouldn't say it's outside of the bounds of possibility that she knows that, right? She's not allowed to forget until those ruins are destroyed, or the relief decays enough and falls off the side of the temple and is no longer recognizable or something. Like, we're talking about, human generations. 1,000 years is a long time for humans, right?
So now that she gets digital, if this thing theoretically did happen and they scanned it, and she's gonna know again.
Right. And I mean, so, like, even taking some, semi-serious examples, right? So, like, Sumerians, right? Like, if I recall correctly, like, Tiamat comes from their legends, right? But it's now been republished and repurposed as, like, the queen god of, dragons for D&D, right? So that the name Tiamat is not going anywhere, even though very, very likely the nature of what the original lore was has greatly changed over several thousand years. But that would be a pretty good example where it's like, how long was the idea of Tiamat basically all but defunct until some little freaking nerds decided to resurrect it in their board game, in their tabletop game, and give it credence that way, And so, it brings up even more interesting vortices of ideas where it's just like, this was all but done until that fucker invented the printing press, and then Gary Gygax invented D&D, or at least codified it as a system, and on and on and on. And what's the next thing? Some jerkweed made a VR game about it, or
I mean, it's sports entertainment, right? Because that's what we know with the gods and wrestling and Thor and doing his college football thing from the Word of Gyms. It's like, right, this is another way. They've now changed what they had to do to get as much of a juice bump as they can.
Right.
You got millions of people cheering them like they are, heroes and gods again, in a less direct way, but still.
Right. So one of the other things to kind of tie in, so a comment from our Facebook feed was talking about the difference in mantles and the gods, was kind of like the difference between I might butcher the pronunciation a little bit, but the Vanir and the Aesir, where it's just like you've got gods and elemental forces, right? So, and that does kind of skirt on what I had suggested with the, with the Shoggoth, right? Is that maybe it is it's elemental evil, or it's elemental fear, or it's elemental whatever. So it doesn't have to follow the same things. You're not summoning Bob the Shoggoth. You're summoning fear, and it just happens to be like, the the creature from Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm sorry, I couldn't help but be a nerd for a second. But you basically have a pool of black evil come and decide to eat people's faces and tip over like ancient kingdoms, because that's apparently what the Shoggoth did in the Dresden Files, or at least a Shoggoth, right? So like you get that kind of thing. But the point here being is that maybe there are very distinct sets of powers, right? The mantles are obviously a thing. The mantles, maybe the mantles are elemental power in the sense that like
they're tied to the seasons at least. So
yeah, well, like even take, so like I'm not trying to conflate things by saying that Faravax is a mantle, right? But he is elemental. Mm-hmm. And so like nobody's worshiping Faravax, at least not that we're aware of, right? And yet he exists. Whereas like, and maybe the mantles work on a similar level at least, but maybe they can also still benefit from that power.
And yeah, well, it'd be like the difference between Big Eye and Small Eye Immortal. There's two ways of looking at these things. Faravax is an elemental cosmic force of nature, but he's also, he's not a mantle. If he dies, he dies. It's what happens.
Thank you, Dolph. Every time.
So,
yeah.
But the courts are obviously, by their nature, and even the Wild Fae. I mean, it's all very, very tied with just being kind of, they are what they are, and you're not going to stop it any more than you would stop a hurricane. Maybe you can redirect it if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's compared to elemental forces with Hades. I think he's like, you can't, handshake a mountain or whatever. These are just also descriptors of these people because they defy other conventional,
Well, and yeah, interestingly, Hades is another example, right? Like, he is a god. Theoretically, he needs to be sustained through worship, but it's like, who? Like, I think there's a quip about, the Hercules Disney movie, right? Or something like that. Or maybe we've joked about it before, but it's just like, so I'm sure that didn't hurt, at the same time, but no one's just sitting there keeping that fire going.
His feelings.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just saying it didn't hurt his power,
Well, Hades is an interesting one because he's already, through classical and through his own words, he's never been one that's sought veneration in the same way as all his siblings. So he seems also to be, but he's also the most grounded one, right? So
literally,
maybe it's, yes, he's
undergrounded.
Very, very funny.
Sorry.
But it could also be due to the fact that he is the most active in what his purpose is. So perhaps that allows him a measure of, doesn't have to expend as much energy, for instance, or something. The more you do what you're supposed to do, the less you have to feed.
Right. Well, yeah, in a further digression, but like, what happens to hell or Hades if people stop believing in it, right? Or Tartarus or whatever, and are these distinctive places anyway? But like, clearly, Hades is there taking care of, Greek hell. Like, if you forget that he does the job, does somebody else take over? Does the whole place just go up with him? Or is that a reason why he stays around? Because that's like turning off the power on the containment unit in Ghostbusters, right?
He
like,
has multiple
do they just
purposes.
get out? Like.
But he has multiple purposes. He is the place where all the dead people are, or at least are the ones that had believed of that mythos. But he is also the armory. That purpose is eternal.
Sure.
So that purpose,
well, yeah, but
he's also
we're
connecting.
Talking about...
He's connecting his realm though to the real places to make it that armory, because exactly everything that they had to do to make it possible for Skin Game. By doing that, he's reestablishing the connection and keeping it alive.
I don't know, but that's not necessarily enough to maintain godlike power, in my opinion, right? Like, you get every generation or 2 or 10, you get a guy sweep through and pick up the artifacts or whatever. Doesn't necessarily, like, it's not nearly as much as, anything Odin's doing, right? Like, any one thing that Odin's doing, and he's doing a dozen potentially, right? So like, another idea that I had while you were talking, though, is like, what if it's the spirits? Because like what you said, the spirits believed that they would go there, so they went there, which is another theological
so it's like a happy
conversation
feedback
to have,
loop
but,
of
like the spirits maintain him because they were mortal spirits and they believe in him. So, as long as they're there,
And let's face it, we know that, ghosts, you gobble up enough of them, you can create a mantle. So even if you're just getting the whispers of that, and you're always there.
Yeah. Right. If someone had managed to dethrone him and take his place, that would be something.
That's
but if they would have to have like moved themselves into his infrastructure to be able to make that work, likely. They would take on his identity as the mantle for everything that he's been working for to make it stay stable. Otherwise, if they weren't willing to literally steal the identity of it, then it might not work, and it might come back. That might be his key to immortality.
Well, hearkening to what EG just said, Darkhallow, right? It is probably literally easier to eat him than to supplant him, right? Like I don't imagine how you would trick the mechanism into being like, yes, I'm the new Hades or whatever. You probably metaphysically need to consume his power,
right?
Or more or less physically, like the Red Court did when they usurped the old Mayan gods.
Right.
And that's what they did, is they basically ate them, or half ate them, took on, and then got worshipped that way.
Right.
Yeah. But again, like that falls into it. Like eating him would then you have to fulfill his duties to keep it going. The same thing the Mayans did. They had to keep going on the Pantheon ritual role to be able to still be the gods.
Yeah, well, I think if you ate just him, probably. But I mean, like the Darkhallow, we know, was going to gobble up the Hunt and the Earl King, and I don't think Cal was planning on just doing what the Earl King does after that. I feel like that would have, plus all the death it would have caused and would have been absorbed. It was going to sort of warp it into something else. He was going to be essentially this mantle of death and chaos, or whatever you want to call it, which I assume, even if he is genuine about his notion that, we're going to end death, would probably have been a helpful sort of.
Could the Darkhallow actually swallow an entire other mantle that is immortal on its own? Like swallowing the Earl King and keeping him versus just taking the Hunt that he had summoned. Those are two different things. And I'd always thought of it as the latter.
Mab was happy to call Kemmler a madman, so she respects him enough to think that this, even if it doesn't do that exactly, because we know from Word of Jim that the Earl King kind of made his base in the same way, so it could also be that because he was sort of empowered the same way, that it maybe, it jives with this.
It was Halloween, right? So the Earl,
that too.
Yeah, well, there is that too.
Yeah, he wasn't anything special. Maybe he eats the Hunt and then has enough power to wrestle the Earl King and then take his mantle that way, and then basically he's like, mantle times 2, and then starts trying to eat up everything else. Because it also wasn't just the Hunt. The Hunt was a huge part of it, don't get me wrong, but like they were concerned that a good chunk of Chicago was going with it, right? Plus all of, who knows how many ancient peoples were buried there, and the Enochians and all of that other stuff, right? So there was a ton of shit they had maneuvered into place to be able to scoop up that power. But yeah, like one of the other ideas that kind of jumped out at me while you guys were talking is like the idea that, sure, like Cal is doing the Darkhallow, he's going to slurp up all this power, right? How much is that then going to bind him? For whatever reason, I had a flash of Aladdin pop into my head when Jafar becomes a genie, right? Like, so he slurps up the Earl King's power. He shouldn't be free of those bonds. That's not how power works, not in the Dresden Files, right? So he would have been obligated potentially to whatever the Earl King was in some way, unless whatever the Darkhallow is doing turns it into like just elemental energy, right? I don't imagine he would just go back to the Earl King's domain and just be like, well, I'm the new Earl King, blah, blah, blah. But I could kind of see it taking on like creepy necromancy shades of, okay, I'm in the domain, but we're going to redecorate. There's going to be a whole bunch more skeletons around here, right? They're just going to be like, Like you're going to have all the, yep, this is now a Lich's Lair type of vibes where it's like, we've got dead trees over there, we've got skeletons over here, and then the goblins, they were just here when I got here, so we left them. It was a nice aesthetic, but
I mean, we can't rule out the possibility that Cal doesn't know all of what he's getting into, I suppose. But it seems like, if he's got this idea that he's going to do this and essentially like kick down the council's front door in Edinburgh, which outside of a little god or a fairy queen, you need that kind of power. Right. If he has enough autonomy and authority to do that, then, it probably goes back to, this is why everybody was so fucking scared of Kemmler, is because he was essentially upsetting the natural order in all sorts of ways.
Right, for sure.
I mean, it seems like his thing. Although he was smart enough not to do it on Demon Reach when he was the warden. Maybe he hadn't invented it yet.
Yeah, or he definitely got the idea that you are what you eat, and that kind of concerned him. He's like, look, I'm an evil, scary fucker, but these things keep me up at night, so,
Well, yeah, I mean, I really don't think you could swallow up any one thing. Like, even if you swallowed up just like one Nagloshi, I mean, you're pretty much not you anymore. But you fucking swallow everything in Demon Reach, including presumably Alfred, because he's there. Right. It's like, there's no, you might as well just explode like the island was going to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing too. Maybe he couldn't have, maybe Kemmler couldn't do it without triggering the failsafe, because that's what a failsafe is for, So.
Yeah. Well, I guess well, I mean, if he's the warden, he can let them out at any time. So,
right.
If he does that, I don't know. I guess you'd probably have to do it one by one then, because you don't want to unleash everything and then hope your vortex is strong enough to swallow it all necessarily.
Right. All right. Now I'm starting to get some dark Doctor Strange vibes. So, it's like, let's just keep eating demons. That couldn't possibly go wrong. Oh, it's the universe. The whole thing. It imploded.
Fine. Make a new one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, well, so that got us a little bit afield of the Venatori, but well, this is why Oblivion is important. Yeah, well, it's fun because it was like a little bit of a rehash, but at the same time, very important, and
so
some new ground. So
back to the Venatori, it doesn't seem like they understand or know everything that's going on either, because if they did try and banish the fairies, which is a very reasonable human thing to want to do, you are getting rid of the guardians of all of your reality. So
True.
They don't know that. Does the archive not understand that? Or does she not have as full control over that?
Right.
Is she just like, what are these uppity humans doing? No, stop it.
Well, it was a different host at the time too, right? So we don't know how much of like the archive is like the mantle or mechanism or whatever is in control. It doesn't seem very much at all. It just seems like you're saddled with all this extra baggage, more or less, right? And don't get me wrong, there's power there and other things that we've seen Ivy tap into, but like maybe it wasn't benevolent when they were trying to off the fairies, right? Like if you're a normal human, like theoretically you can get corrupted or whatever, or maybe the person who was the archive at the time was just going down a checklist and be like, and fuck those guys, it's their turn. I don't know, but yeah, I can't imagine that Ivy doesn't know that. But maybe at the time, some other things were going on, but yeah, it seems like you would start with smaller fish, and like we don't know where the archive came from either, do we? Like,
well, if the books, it says humans made it, created the archive some 5,000 years ago or whatever it was, I believe.
Sure.
People like the oracles have been it, so it goes back a while. We don't know how they made it.
The White Council.
Well, yeah, it could have been. I mean, the White Council seem, a bunch of wizards who want to store a bunch of knowledge seem like the kind of people who would have the power and the desire to make a walking library of Alexandria for all time. but we don't know because Lucio says as much. Some, number of thousands of years ago, we don't know who and we don't know why created the archive. It's like, all right, cool.
Well, yeah, and that, I mean, right. Those were curious things, but it also twigged with your whole Library of Alexandria comment that it's like the Merlin was seen going into the Library of Alexandria to save books, and it's like if he knew that the archive existed, and how could he not? Because I mean, Dresden's nobody, and he knows that the archive exists, right? Like you'd think, he'd be out there just sipping tea, be like, "Well, that fucking sucks," but I'm gonna
go. Yeah, but you're not gonna write it down again for people. Whatever was in Alexandria was lost.
Well,
even though she has the knowledge, she's not writing it down.
We only have Ivy to go on, but if the archive's supposed to be a neutral player, Merlin's probably not going to be able to just like pick her brain for anything at any time.
Right.
Yes, I would like to make a donation to your cause. Thank you very much. So
someone had.
I was going to say
probably.
I mean, seriously, even if she was inclined to tell someone, a wizard would probably be the last person to be like, "Hey, so remember that thing I wrote down? Oh yeah, the scroll that I've been trying to get rid of for 500 years? No, never heard of it. Sorry."
Right. Yeah. Well, in that case, sure. It certainly wouldn't be like a full reconstruction, but still, I wouldn't like if I knew a person that was the sum of all knowledge, I would not run into a burning building. I mean, I'm an archmage, so maybe fire's the least of my concerns.
There's a new headcanon. The Venatori responsible for the fire at Alexandria because the archive needs some shit gone.
Right.
Maybe they're the one that offed Merlin.
That would be really lame. I mean, that would just...
Yeah, that would be. But it's also just like thinking of them being at odds is kind of fun.
Well, I mean, everybody's at odds, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it was
especially because
I can't fully remember. It said that the archive was meant for, like, if giant disaster happened to humanity, she would be able to make it possible to restart better. Like, if nuclear apocalypse, here's how you make medicine immediately after.
Well, yes,
something like that. But we just haven't.
Plague back then.
We don't know of any time when she's actually disseminating information, do we? We don't know if that's ever happened. We just know that
she really probably hasn't had to, because if that's her function, she's a receptacle of all this knowledge for a certain time and for two purposes, essentially, to get rid of these things that we don't know about in the main story and to kickstart humanity again when everything goes to hell. Neither of those things have happened to.
But at what point does she have? At what point is she allowed to act? I guess. Like, did she help the White Council take down Kemmler? Would she have helped take down Cowl after the Darkhallow?
I don't know if she's...
Would she have helped? I mean, she was there, although she wasn't doing much after Enya.
If we go by the literal description, she's an Avenger, not a Prevenger, right? I mean, she's an after the fact.
She's also neutral, though, too, right?
Right.
So, like,
Right, but
I mean, she's on the side of humanity to help them do these things.
So she's not going to take a step of this side of the human war versus that side of the human war. Fine. But at what point will the archive step in against magical creatures versus humanity, exactly like Enya?
That's a tough question because she's gone active a couple of times, right? One of the, at least one. No, she was there. She didn't like throw down with the gods, but she like.
No, she was doing support stuff.
Yeah.
What was she doing?
She also did at the aquarium, and she's not neutral as far as it comes to outsiders and non-human entities, right? Since she's gone after the Fae and she's gone after, But
it is Enya Dalton.
It's Enya.
No, he's right. F you.
But anyway. So yeah, I'm curious about that. I mean, because I guess as far as the Accords go, she's neutral.
Sure.
And the Accords are relatively recent, so I guess they got over that whole "you tried to murk me" back before the Gutenberg Press thing.
Are you really a frenemy if you haven't tried to completely wipe out your counterparts?
It's the enemy side of frenemy.
Well, Mab is probably like, had I been in your shoes. That would have made sense. But
the difference is Mab is like, I absolutely would have shot my shot. The difference is I wouldn't have missed. So, that's what you'd get from Mab. It'd be like, of course you should have taken the shot, dear child, but you missed. That's the problem. So,
yeah, pretty much. But yeah, so I mean, the archive is, and there's also got the self-preservation thing, right? Like she's supposed to stay out of these types of things because she's the last hard drive. So
right.
She's also not
well,
supposed
and then,
to really be.
Yeah, you're talking about like rebuild society in case of nuclear war. And I'm like, I mean, that's an obviously very existential, real fear for the last, 50 or 60 years. Does she sleep in a bunker? Like, because she should.
Well, she's probably got enough magical defenses to theoretically withstand that.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess the good news is like in a lot of those cases, I would imagine the orders would have to be written down, so she'd know about 5 minutes before everybody else, right? But at the same time, like,
oh yeah, she could just like slip into the Never Never if she wanted to at that point.
Maybe, yeah. There's holy crap. There's like a whole episode of speculation now. Like, what would the archives magical defenses look like? Like, I mean, there's no reason to neglect your physical security, regardless of all your magical stuff, right? So where she's at, like at a minimum, I would imagine it being a mansion, akin to like, Doctor Strange's place, right? Something along those lines where it's like, yeah, okay, it doesn't have to be like living quarters and shit like that, but it's a large, imposing building. She's got magical defenses, and I mean, hell, I guess she could go through security by obscurity and live in an apartment in the middle of nowhere, but like she's gonna need to know what's on the other side of the Never Never in case she needs to Dresden out, right? So on the other side, what does that look like, and what are those defenses look like?
Unless she has enough juice to temporarily make her own bridge to wherever she wanted to go, which is not impossible. She's got a lot of power.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine regardless of whether she can or not, she's going to know what's on the other side of her closet door because she's a lot smarter than the idiot wizard we follow.
Right. Well, and then do you think we're going to see it? Do you think things are going to be that bad, when like the BAT or when the kaiju attacks and all of that shit, like we're going to get some.
Maybe she has plans for a Gundam or a Jaeger in her head somewhere.
She's got a Warforged Colossi in her back pocket. Just be like,
all right, it's time to break out.
She's the one who's going to put Bob in the Statue of Liberty. She's the one who's going to put Bob in the Statue of Liberty and turn him into a.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's not my idea. That's long since.
Yeah.
I forget who came up with it, but.
I mean, at least since Skin Game, right? Since we saw him take over the Lions. So. Yeah.
Well, that's what people also wanted much more creepily to happen with Bonnie, to have her put in Helen Beckett's daughter.
People are weird, man. Yeah. Okay, anyway. Gonna see if I can flush that out of the system real quick, but...
no, keep it. Keep it forever.
It's just... Yeah.
So eventually.
And you got 5,000 years of compound interest and prep time. Like, I mean, I'd be good to have a year of unlimited money and prep time as a wizard. Could you imagine the archive being like?
Well, it's funny because I mean, you have her mother, right, who was essentially a teenager and not ready for the job and all this stuff. So. Right. Up until that point, it probably would have been very stable because we, through Lucio's spiel is like, this whole thing is set up to keep the archive essentially insulated. You get it when you're like 30 or 40, you've had enough of a life to, be your own person. And now you're getting saddled with all this, but you're not a child, which is bad. In a lot of ways, it's funny because it should be easier to like override a kid. But at the same time, I guess kids are, to go back to the phrase, a little more of an elemental force and not necessarily as controllable.
Right.
Because obviously we see Ivy, go against her Jarvis protocols for Harry's sake, for instance. And then gets rid of Kincaid very stupidly, but that's a different issue.
Yes.
Yeah, well, emotions, right? So Kincaid was supposed to be her number 2 in the Jaeger pilot, in the Jaeger cockpit, but he.
I was going to say, she can talk about her feet reaching the pedals now all she wants. He's still driving the fucking thing.
Right.
I mean, just because your feet can reach pedals, why would you want to be the one driving? Driving sucks.
Well, yeah, no, he's driving because he's going to have the tactical training necessary. She's manning the guns because she's got the guns necessary for it. So also, well, I don't know. I mean, he's an.
I think he's wheelman and shotgun out the window.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also sniper and whatever, but.
And then he could go Air Force mode with his demon form and just fly, assuming those wings work.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up again.
What? You have nightmares?
No, I just because we needed to talk. Is it Mavra? Is it Kincaid? What's he doing? Why is he so big?
Is
he as human as Dresden? Is Dresden
demon.
Human?
Oh no!
See, that's all. That's attached, man. That's not in a bubble. You thought
it's only attached because you vocalized it.
You said
it could have been. It could have been left to the side in the implications, but no
implications.
Yeah.
Because of the.
Man.
So the downfall of the Venatori Umbrorum is the fact that they're so disconnected that they don't know what they're doing. Might not be smart, just like trying to erase the fairy guardians. And I don't know, it's like, yes, they should be fearful of fairies, and if they are going to be so partisan towards helping humans, probably a good thing to make the monsters go away. But as everything else kind of points out, you need the fairies because they're the monsters that are on your side. But the Venatori don't even get to know that because knowing is bad. It's like knowledge is power, but you don't get any because that's bad.
I mean, to a degree, it's the Gates one is weird because it's like the more people that know about it, I guess in theory could be a problem. If you get one person who's like, I would like the Gates to open and now I'm going to work towards that. As opposed to thinking they're a metaphor like Dresden used to.
Well, Dresden's an idiot, but how many people on the White Council who know the rules of magic and say hey, what are these gates that they say are bad things? I want to know where they are.
For example, the senior council would know, right? Well, obviously, one of them works there, but I would hazard to guess that every single person on the senior council is aware that no, these are literal physical things, even though they don't really know what.
They left Christos in the room with what's her face alone.
Well, okay, so he's an exception.
I mean, I understand why Dresden thought it was metaphorical, because what the fuck is the outer gates actually mean? But other people are smart enough to ask the question of what it's the Starborn that people keep saying to me, and ask, what are these gates, and how do I make sure I don't open them by accident?
Well, you make it a law.
Right.
Thou shalt not open the outer gates.
But if it's just the concept of if you say, don't go over there, I need to know where over there is so I don't go there.
No, say, don't open even ask the question, and therefore you'll never have to worry about it. That's it. Wizards. Just don't go chasing waterfalls and don't go opening doors. It's easy. TLC told us long ago. In the before times.
Mm. Is this the before times that included pants? Before everyone just wearing leggings and lounge pants because COVID?
I don't know. I still don't wear leggings.
Hold on. How old are you? It might have been before you were born. So it might have been that before times, but only just if it was. So you don't know TLC?
The Learning Channel? That became a bunch of bullshit.
That's a no. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in the 3rd grade and we were listening to that and Gangster's Paradise and all that good stuff. So, yeah.
quite a progressive Mormon household you had there.
Wasn't even the house; it was at school. So, looking back, I am kind of surprised, but yeah, some of it makes sense. Some of it's just like, yeah, but anyway, that's your piece of advice today. Don't go chasing waterfalls. So, the rest of the advice is stick to the lakes and the rivers you're used to. So, right, but
just don't read anything Peabody translated. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna just get bad grammar anyway. So,
hey, German is untidy. Andreas would know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if German's untidy, I'd really like to see what he thinks about English. You know?
I mean, we've heard his English; it's very untidy.
Yeah.
See what happens when you're not here, Andreas? You get made fun of. And guess what happens when you are here? You get made fun of.
Yeah, I was like,
but he could defend himself.
Defend is a strong word.
He could attempt to defend himself.
He is sort of like, and then
he can complain. I think, but,
right?
Yes, and next week he's gonna have to do a lot of defending. I'll have to say that.
Which ones did he pick again?
Creep and Cabin in the Woods.
Okay.
One of those is good.
Yeah.
I haven't. I watched Creep last night, and he has a lot to answer for.
All right.
In her needing to watch horror movies because of some dumb prompt that we stuck to for whatever.
If only there was a director who could have directed our topics in this manner.
Well, actually, I think it's turning out well, but I have to question.
A dumb premise, so. Yes, some of you guys have bad taste. We've been over that. So we've got like a whole podcast about how bad your taste is. So.
Beggars can't be choosers. You wanted prompts, we got prompts.
Yes, we did. It's just like
the one after that's going to be even worse because it's very vague.
Andreas is one fan in the chat, so
it's a mystery why.
Yeah, Andreas couldn't make the show today, but then his one fan showed up instead. So
amazing how that works.
Sorry, it's too good.
It's actually Ben.
Yeah. So Dalton, towards your comment, what we did is because we couldn't decide what kind of horror to watch, we wanted to do our favorite, and then we wanted to do the scariest. For us personally anyway, right? So I think Cabin in the Woods is probably his favorite because I didn't find that particularly scary, and I have no idea about Creep, so... But,
maybe he finds meta commentary terrifying. There you go.
Nice. Yeah, so... Let's see. Yeah, because I did The Mist, which, it's creepy-ish, but it's solidly horror, but it's just my favorite overall. And then I had to go with It because I was like, what's the last movie that I lost sleep over? And, that was it.
Ha.
Thank you.
I got the
pay
reference.
A nickel next time I see you. Really?
No.
That's a reference?
No. Make it a dime. It's inflation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Whew. I better pay you soon then, because otherwise it's going to be $1 by the time I see you.
It's actually $1 right now. Inflation's out of control.
The Ninth Gate, yeah.
I don't know.
I haven't seen that one yet.
It's Johnny Depp is chasing around a bunch of scary books.
Oh, okay.
Wait. No, I'm thinking of whatever. There's plenty of horror movies that are fun.
Sixth Day, right? So,
what
isn't that the Arnold one?
The Sixth Day, that's the cloning one.
Yeah. I'm not your clone baby. You're my clone baby. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway.
And now you've seen the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Spoilers. So.
We should do. Actually, that should be one of our prompts. Your favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'd I mean, we've been kicking around doing like individual actors because of how prolific they are. So I would
or the top 10 Arnold Schwarzenegger movies.
Yeah, there we go. We'll tier list them. So
okay.
I'd rather do Arnold than Nicolas Cage. That's for sure. So, but
I mean, there's merits to both.
It depends. Like, do you want to go something that's enjoyable, or do you want to go towards something that's painful?
Well, you could get both in both of these categories.
You do like damaged people, so I guess you're voting Nicolas Cage. So,
all right, I'm reserving. I'm reserving right now. My 2 Arnold movies are Jingle All the Way and True Lies.
Really?
Yes.
I don't think I've seen either of those.
But why?
Then you are in for a treat.
Yeah, like
I kind of expected you to take the Batman movie.
Pick Predator and something.
Nah,
so.
Predator's fine, but I'd probably go Terminator.
Yeah, somebody's going to pick Terminator and T2, so I'm getting in some variety here.
Good for you.
I mean, dang, that's going to be tough. Like, are we picking our top 2?
Well, that'll give us a top 10, right? If all 5 of us are there. So.
Well, yeah, but
Total Recall was fun.
See?
Yeah, right. Like, there's a lot to pick from. So
Conan, I assume you would also pick Conan because you're.
It'd probably be Ben because something.
Yeah, Conan just barely had like Technicolor, so
right.
Yeah,
we'll go with that.
Right. He's actually going to pick what was the workout documentary? I'm forgetting the name of it. He's going to pick that because that's the first thing.
I remember some stills of that were in black and white, even back to his style.
What was the? Let's see. The Last Stand, is that the one where he was like the old cop or whatever?
Oh, Kindergarten Cop. How did I just remember?
See?
Jesus Christ. Okay, this is fun.
There are so many good Arnold movies. Batman and Robin, the memes.
So long.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's going to be tough. So.
Pumping Iron, that was it.
All right. Well, we've got a couple of months worth of movies to watch now on the other podcast, so not this one. This is just a tangent because we ran out of shit to talk about the Venatori.
Hey, we did.
And
okay.
I spared you from our conspiracy theory that, is still out there someday coming. So
good. Spare me too.
It was your idea.
Was it?
You quit bringing shit ideas to the podcast and then we could spare you.
Well, now you need to shame.
No, because I get rid of them and then clearly I forget them. So
yeah, right.
I am the archive in this
scenario. You were the encyclopedia.
A certain popular fast food joint. You don't remember that, Sin?
It's wigging a little
Burger
bit, but
King.
I still don't remember the full.
Yeah, that someone's been watching him from Burger King the whole time. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
Yeah, you're welcome for that. That's a primer for like whenever we remember that's a meme. So.
All right. I think we should just call it quits for today. Bye.